A millionaire is forced to share a room with a virgin woman. The young lady sees him as a shallow man, lost in a materialistic and empty world. But throughout the retreat, he starts to see the world in a way he never imagined. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Alexander Reed stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, the morning light glinting off the glass and steel monuments of his success. 50 stories below, New York City was already pulsing with energy. His energy. His city. At 42, Alexander had amassed a fortune that most could only dream of, turning Reed Enterprises into a global powerhouse of innovation and technological advancement. "Mr. Reed, your 8 a.m. is waiting in the conference room," his assistant's voice chimed through the intercom. "And Mr. Chen called again about the Singapore deal." "Tell Chen I'll call him back after my meeting," Alexander replied, adjusting his custom Italian suit. "And have my driver ready at noon. I'm having lunch with the board." He took one final look at his reflection in the window. His dark hair, impeccably styled with just hints of distinguished grey at the temples, framed a face hardened by years of ruthless decision-making. His eyes, a cold blue that rarely revealed emotion, surveyed his kingdom with practiced detachment. This was the face of success. This was what his father had always demanded. "You're either at the top or you're nothing," Howard Reed had told him countless times during his childhood in their modest Boston home. After his mother's passing when he was just 7, Alexander had been left with only his father's harsh lessons on life and worth. "The world respects power and money, son. Nothing else matters." The memory of his father's voice still rang in his ears as he strode through the corridors of Reed Tower, employees parting like water before him. Few dared to make eye contact. Fewer still attempted conversation. Alexander preferred it that way. Distance created respect. Respect created control. "Morning, Alex." The cheerful voice cut through the usual silence, causing Alexander to stiffen momentarily before turning to face the one person who insisted on treating him like a normal human being. "Marcus," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I didn't realize you were in New York." Marcus Donovan, a short, perpetually smiling man in his 60s, approached with arms wide open. "Just flew in this morning. Couldn't miss the opportunity to see my favorite protege in person." Alexander tolerated the brief hug that followed, his body rigid. Marcus had been his father's business partner decades ago, before striking out on his own path. When Howard Reed had suffered a heart attack 8 years ago, it was Marcus who had stepped in to mentor Alexander, helping him navigate the troubled waters of his father's struggling company and transform it into the empire it was today. "I thought our quarterly review wasn't until next week," Alexander said, checking his watch. "I'm headed into a meeting." "Oh, I'm not here for business," Marcus replied, his smile widening. "I'm here to deliver this personally." He handed Alexander a cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and expensive. Alexander opened it with a raised eyebrow, pulling out a card embossed with gold lettering. "The Awakening Path, a 7-day journey to authentic self-discovery," he read aloud, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What is this, Marcus? Some new age nonsense?" "It's a retreat I'm hosting at my estate in the Berkshires," Marcus explained, unfazed by Alexander's reaction. "Limited to just 12 participants, the most influential minds coming together to reshape how we approach business and life." Alexander handed the card back. "I don't have time for self-help seminars. The Tokyo expansion launches next month and we're finalizing the Chen acquisition." "Which is precisely why you need this," Marcus insisted, pushing the card back into Alexander's hand. "When was the last time you took a break? When was the last time you did anything that wasn't about adding another zero to your bank account?" "I don't need a break," Alexander replied, his tone clipped. "I need to maintain focus." Marcus's expression softened. "Howard would be proud of what you've built, Alex, but is this really all there is to life? Working yourself to exhaustion, surrounding yourself with people who fear you rather than respect you?" Alexander felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of his father. "My father understood that success requires sacrifice." "And what exactly have you sacrificed?" Marcus asked, his gentle tone belying the sharpness of his question. Connections. Joy. The ability to trust someone enough to let them see the real you. This conversation is bordering on inappropriate, Marcus, Alexander warned, his patience wearing thin. I appreciate the invitation, but I'll have to decline. Marcus sighed, reaching into his jacket to pull out another envelope. I was afraid you'd say that. That's why I took the liberty of making it part of our mentorship agreement. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he took the second envelope, opening it to find a legal document. What is this? The terms of our continued partnership, Marcus explained calmly. You'll notice Section 3.2 outlines the requirement for annual personal development experiences as designated by either party. You can't be serious, Alexander scoffed, skimming the document. This clause is binding, Marcus finished for him, as agreed upon and signed by you 3 years ago. I've never invoked it before, but I'm doing so now. Alexander felt the control he so carefully maintained beginning to slip. And if I refuse? Then I'll be forced to reconsider my 20% stake in Reed Enterprises, Marcus replied, his voice still friendly but his eyes serious. Which, as you know, would trigger a clause allowing the Chen family first rights to purchase those shares. Alexander's jaw tightened. Marcus knew exactly where to apply pressure. The Chen family had been trying to gain greater control for years, and Alexander had fought tirelessly to keep them at bay. Losing Marcus's shares to them would be catastrophic for his autonomy. This is blackmail, Alexander said quietly. This is intervention, Marcus corrected him. 1 week, Alex. 7 days out of your carefully controlled life to potentially discover something worth more than all of this. He gestured at the gleaming tower around them. Alexander looked down at the retreat invitation again, noting the date. It was scheduled to begin in 3 days. I'll have my assistant rearrange my calendar, he finally conceded, his voice cold. Marcus beamed. Excellent, pack light. No suits, no tech, no assistants, just you and whatever personal items you need for a week in the countryside. No technology, Alexander repeated incredulously. That's not possible. I run a global company. Your company will survive without you for 7 days, Marcus assured him. Think of it as a test of the systems you've built. If everything falls apart without your constant oversight, perhaps your empire isn't as strong as you believe. Before Alexander could respond, Marcus checked his watch. I should let you get to your meeting. My driver will pick you up Friday morning at 6 a.m. Oh, and Alex? His expression turned serious. Come with an open mind. You might be surprised by what you discover when you stop trying to control everything. As Marcus walked away, Alexander stood rooted to the spot, the invitation clutched in his hand. The thought of 7 days without work, without his carefully constructed barriers, filled him with an unfamiliar sensation that took him a moment to identify. Fear. What Marcus was asking wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Alexander had built his entire identity around his ability to maintain control, to never show weakness. The idea of authentic self-discovery threatened the very foundations of who he believed himself to be. But as he continued toward his meeting, a small voice in the back of his mind, one he hadn't heard in years, whispered a disturbing question. What if there was something more? What if all of this, the power, the money, the endless pursuit of more, wasn't enough? Alexander silenced the voice with practiced efficiency. It didn't matter. He would attend this retreat, fulfill his obligation to Marcus and return to his life unchanged. After all, he was Alexander Reed. He defined success. He controlled his destiny. Little did he know that destiny had other plans. Plans that began with a modest retreat center in the Berkshire Mountains and a woman who would challenge everything he thought he knew about value, worth, and the true meaning of success. The Berkshire Mountains sprawled in lush green waves beneath the late spring sky as Marcus's black SUV wound its way up the narrow road. Alexander sat in stony silence, watching the urban landscape of New York fade into distant memory with each passing mile. His phone had been confiscated at the entrance to the property, ceremonially surrendered, as Marcus had called it, leaving him feeling strangely naked without its familiar weight in his pocket. Almost there, the driver announced cheerfully. turning onto a gravel driveway that cut through a dense forest of maple and oak trees. As they emerged from the tree line, Alexander's expectations of a luxury retreat were immediately dashed. Instead of the five-star accommodations he had anticipated, a modest collection of wooden buildings surrounded by gardens and walking paths came into view. The main building, a two-story structure with wide windows and a wraparound porch, looked more like a country bed and breakfast than the executive retreat center he had imagined. "This can't be right," Alexander muttered to himself as the car pulled to a stop. Marcus appeared on the porch steps, arms outstretched in welcome. "Alex, you made it!" His enthusiasm was palpable as he bounded down to greet his reluctant protégé. "What is this place?" Alexander asked, stepping out of the SUV and surveying his surroundings with obvious disappointment. "I thought you said this was for influential minds." "The most influential," Marcus confirmed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Though perhaps not in the way you were thinking. Come inside and meet everyone." Alexander followed Marcus into the main building, noting the simple, rustic decor, handcrafted furniture, local artwork, and potted plants that brought the outdoors in. It was comfortable, yes, but a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" Marcus called out to the small group gathered in the common area. "Our final participant has arrived. This is Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises." 10 faces turned toward him with varying degrees of interest. Alexander scanned the group, recognizing none of them. There was no one from the Fortune 500 list, no tech moguls, no financial wizards, just ordinary-looking people dressed in casual clothes, many already wearing name tags. "I don't understand," Alexander whispered to Marcus. "You said this was for business leaders." "I said influential minds," Marcus corrected. "Influence comes in many forms, Alex. Dr. Layla Patel over there is revolutionizing trauma therapy for veterans. James Whitaker left a 7-figure salary to build sustainable housing in developing countries, and Eleanor Chen..." "Chen?" Alexander's head snapped up, as in related to the Chen family. "No relation," Marcus assured him. "She's a high school physics teacher from Vermont who developed a program to get more girls interested in STEM fields. Over 1,000 of her students have gone on to careers in science and technology." Alexander's frustration mounted. He'd been misled, manipulated into attending what appeared to be nothing more than a glorified summer camp for do-gooders. "Let me show you to your room so you can get settled before our welcome dinner," Marcus said, guiding Alexander toward a hallway. "I assume I have a private suite?" Alexander asked, already dreading the answer. Marcus's hesitation confirmed his fears. "Actually, part of our program involves shared accommodations. It fosters community and breaks down barriers." "You expect me to share a room?" Alexander nearly choked on the words. "With a stranger?" "Think of it as an opportunity for growth," Marcus suggested, stopping in front of a door marked with a simple wooden plaque. "Maple Room." Before Alexander could protest further, Marcus knocked and opened the door, revealing a modestly furnished room with 2 twin beds, simple wooden dressers, and a shared bathroom. A woman was already inside, unpacking a small suitcase on one of the beds. "Emma, I'd like you to meet your roommate for the week," Marcus said warmly. "This is Alexander Reed." The woman turned, and Alexander found himself looking into a pair of warm brown eyes, framed by loose auburn curls. She was younger than most of the other participants he'd seen, perhaps early 30s, dressed in a simple sundress that fell to her knees. There was something immediately disarming about her, a natural grace that required no enhancement. "Emma Hayes," she said, offering her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's nice to meet you." Alexander shook her hand briefly, noting the calluses that suggested she worked with her hands. "Likewise," he replied automatically, though his tone conveyed the opposite sentiment. "Emma runs a family bookstore in Williamsburg, Virginia," Marcus explained. "It's been in her family for generations." "How quaint," Alexander said, unable to keep the condescension from his voice. Emma's smile tightened. "Yes, well, not everyone measures success by the size of their office building, Mr. Reed." Marcus cleared his throat. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Dinner is at 6 in the main hall, followed by our opening circle. Dress is casual." As Marcus departed, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Alexander moved to the unclaimed bed, placing his designer weekend bag on it with obvious distaste. "I apologize if I sounded rude," Emma said suddenly, continuing to unpack her belongings. "That was uncalled for." Alexander looked up, surprised by her apology. "No need, I was equally impolite." "I'm not usually sharing a room with a stranger," she explained, placing a worn leather journal on her nightstand. "Especially not a—" "A what?" Alexander prompted when she trailed off. Emma hesitated. "A man like you." "You don't know what kind of man I am," Alexander pointed out, though he was curious about her assessment. "Let me guess," Emma said, turning to face him fully. "Wealthy, powerful, used to getting your way. You're here reluctantly, probably because someone forced you to be. You think this whole retreat is beneath you, and you're counting the hours until you can return to your real life." Alexander felt a flicker of annoyance at her accuracy. "Impressive. Did you read that in one of your books?" "No," Emma replied simply. "It's written all over your face, and in that watch that probably costs more than my store makes in a month." Alexander glanced down at his Patek Philippe timepiece, suddenly self-conscious. "It was a gift," he said, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to explain. "From yourself, I imagine," Emma said with a knowing look. She returned to her unpacking, removing several books and arranging them neatly on her nightstand. Alexander watched her, irritated by her presumptions yet intrigued by her directness. Most people were either intimidated by him or trying to impress him. Emma Hayes seemed to be neither. "If we're going to be roommates for a week," he said finally, "perhaps we should establish some ground rules." "Such as?" Emma asked without looking up. "I'm an early riser. I need quiet and order. I value my privacy." Emma nodded. "I'm also an early riser. I meditate for 30 minutes each morning, read before bed, and I'm allergic to arrogance." Alexander almost smiled despite himself. That last one might be a problem. "I suspected as much," Emma replied, and this time there was a hint of humor in her voice. "Look, Mr. Reed." "Alexander," he corrected her. "Alexander," she amended. "I don't want to be here any more than you do. My Aunt Meredith insisted. It would be good for my soul, and paid the fee as a birthday gift. I'd much rather be at home with my books and my cat. So why don't we just stay out of each other's way as much as possible?" "That sounds ideal," Alexander agreed, though he found himself oddly disappointed by the suggestion. As they continued unpacking in silence, Alexander covertly observed his roommate. Emma Hayes was unlike anyone in his usual social circle. There was something refreshingly authentic about her, a lack of pretense that both unsettled and intrigued him. She seemed completely comfortable in her own skin, unbothered by his wealth or status. When Emma left to explore the grounds before dinner, Alexander sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. This was going to be the longest week of his life. Trapped in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by idealists and do-gooders, sharing a room with a woman who seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade. Yet, as he reluctantly changed into more casual clothes for dinner, Alexander couldn't help but wonder about Emma Hayes. What had made her so fiercely independent? What principles guided her life? And why did he, a man who prided himself on his emotional detachment, find himself so curious about a small-town bookstore owner? The dinner bell rang, interrupting his thoughts. As Alexander made his way to the main hall, he steeled himself for a week of discomfort and inconvenience. If Marcus thought this experience would fundamentally change him, he was sorely mistaken. Alexander Reed had spent a lifetime building his walls, defining himself by his achievements and possessions. No rustic retreat center, no well-meaning mentor, and certainly no judgmental bookstore owner was going to change that. At least, that's what he told himself as he entered the dining hall and spotted Emma sitting alone at a corner table, absorbed in one of her books. For reasons he couldn't quite articulate, Alexander found himself walking toward her table, instead of seeking solitude elsewhere. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, surprising himself almost as much as he surprised her. Emma looked up, her expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "It's a free country," she replied, marking her place in her book and setting it aside. "Even for billionaires." "Millionaire," Alexander corrected her with the ghost of a smile. "I haven't quite reached the B word yet." "My mistake," Emma said, and for the first time he saw a genuine smile light up her face. "I suppose we all have our crosses to bear." As they were joined by other participants and the evening's activities began, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that despite his resistance, something had already begun to shift within him. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but present nonetheless. Like the first hairline crack in a dam that had withstood the pressure for years, never knowing that its eventual collapse would come not from a flood, but from a single persistent drop of water. By the third day of the retreat, Alexander found himself in a state of unfamiliar unease. The structured activities, ranging from group discussions to creative exercises, were designed to gradually strip away defenses and foster genuine connection. While most participants eagerly embraced the process, Alexander maintained his careful distance, participating minimally and revealing nothing of substance. "Today we begin our deep work," Marcus announced after breakfast. As they gathered in the main hall, the furniture had been rearranged, creating a circle of cushions on the polished wooden floor. "Please find a seat in our sharing circle." Alexander reluctantly took his place, noting that Emma sat directly across from him. Unlike their first day, when she had been equally resistant to the retreat's activities, she now seemed to have softened. Her face was more relaxed, her interactions with others more open. Alexander found himself inexplicably irritated by this transformation. "Each of you has a story," Marcus continued, taking his place in the circle. "A pivotal moment that shaped who you are today. We carry these moments with us, often letting them dictate our choices without conscious awareness." He placed a carved wooden box in the center of the circle. "Today we share our defining traumas and the beliefs they created." A ripple of tension passed through the group. Several participants shifted uncomfortably on their cushions. "Trauma is perhaps too clinical a word," Marcus amended, noting the unease. "I'm speaking of those moments that divided your life into before and after, the experiences that fundamentally changed how you see yourself and the world." He opened the box and removed a small stone, smooth and black. "I'll begin. When I was 12, my father lost his job at the steel mill. Within 6 months, we lost our home, my mother left us, and I was wearing the same clothes to school every day." He turned the stone over in his palm. "I decided then that security came from having enough money, and that people would always abandon you when things got difficult." He placed the stone back in the box. "For 30 years, I let those beliefs drive me. I accumulated wealth but couldn't maintain relationships. I trusted no one. It wasn't until I nearly had a breakdown at 52 that I realized I had built my life on beliefs formed by a traumatized child." Marcus passed the box to his left. "Your turn." One by one, the participants shared their stories. A woman spoke of growing up with an alcoholic mother and learning to become invisible. A young man described how his athletic scholarship vanished after an injury, forcing him to redefine his worth beyond physical prowess. Each account was raw, honest, and met with supportive silence from the group. As the box made its way around the circle, Alexander's anxiety mounted. He had spent decades burying his past, compartmentalizing emotions that might interfere with his drive for success. The thought of exposing himself to these strangers was unthinkable. Then the box reached Emma. She held it for a long moment, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, she said quietly. "It was my sophomore year of college. One minute I was worried about finals, and the next I was planning 2 funerals and inheriting a struggling family business." Alexander found himself leaning forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her words. "Everyone expected me to sell the bookstore," Emma continued. "Use the money for school, pursue my dreams. But that store was all I had left of them." Her voice trembled slightly. So I dropped out, moved back to Williamsburg, and dedicated myself to keeping their legacy alive. She selected a stone from the box, a pale blue one that matched the clear sky outside the windows. I learned that dreams are fragile, that everything you love can vanish in an instant. I built walls around my heart, convinced that if I just focused on preserving what was, I wouldn't have to risk creating something new. Emma looked up, her gaze moving across the circle until it met Alexander's. I've never been in a serious relationship, never traveled farther than Boston. I've read thousands of stories about people living extraordinary lives, but I've been too afraid to write my own. She placed the stone back in the box. Safety became my prison. A heavy silence fell over the room as Emma passed the box to the next person. Alexander watched her, seeing her in an entirely new light. Behind her quiet confidence and sharp wit was a woman who had faced devastating loss and chosen to honor her past, even at the cost of her future. It was a different kind of sacrifice than the ones he had made, but a sacrifice nonetheless. When the box finally reached Alexander, his instinct was to offer something superficial, a sanitized version of his history that would fulfill the requirement without exposing his vulnerabilities. But as he looked at the stones nestled in the wooden container, each representing someone's moment of profound change, he felt an unexpected compulsion toward honesty. "My mother died when I was 7, he began, surprised by the sound of his own voice. Cancer, it was quick, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. His throat tightened around the words, unaccustomed to speaking them aloud. My father was challenged by single parenthood. Alexander selected a dark grey stone, its surface rough against his palm. He was a man who believed that showing emotion was weakness, that the measure of a man was his ability to provide and control his circumstances. The memories surfaced with surprising clarity, his father's rare displays of approval always tied to achievement, never freely given. After her funeral, he told me it was time to be a man. No more tears, no more weakness. Alexander felt a weight pressing against his chest as he continued. So I became what he wanted, driven, disciplined, detached. I learned that vulnerability was dangerous, that love was unreliable, but success could be controlled. He looked up, meeting Emma's gaze across the circle. I built an empire on the foundation of a 7-year-old boy's fear of disappointing his father. The admission hung in the air, raw and exposed. Alexander had never articulated these thoughts to anyone, perhaps not even to himself. Yet here, he was revealing his deepest wounds to a room of strangers. I have everything I've ever worked for, he concluded, returning the stone to the box. And some days I wonder if any of it actually matters. The circle continued, but Alexander barely heard the remaining stories. He felt strangely hollow, as though something vital had been extracted from within him. The carefully constructed narrative of his life, that his success was the product of ambition and intelligence alone, had been exposed as incomplete. There was a wounded child at the core of his achievements, still seeking the approval of a man long gone. After the session ended, Alexander slipped away from the group, needing solitude to process what had happened. He found himself on a hiking trail that wound through the property, climbing steadily upward until he reached a small clearing overlooking the valley below. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, the world painted in gold and amber. It's beautiful, isn't it? Alexander turned to find Emma standing a few feet away, her hair lifted slightly by the breeze. I didn't realize I was being followed, he said, his tone sharper than he intended. I wasn't following you, Emma replied calmly. This spot was mentioned in the welcome packet as a good place for reflection. Seems we had the same idea. Alexander nodded, embarrassed by his defensiveness. It is beautiful, he conceded, gesturing toward the view. Emma moved to stand beside him, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. That was brave, what you shared today. It wasn't bravery, Alexander said dismissively. It was manipulation. Marcus designed an environment where non-participation would make me the outlier. Basic group psychology. Emma laughed softly. You really don't know how to accept a compliment, do you? I'm accustomed to praise for achievements, not for discussing. My childhood traumas, Alexander admitted. Maybe the ability to be vulnerable is an achievement worth recognizing, Emma suggested. She sat down on a flat rock, wrapping her arms around her knees. I was surprised by what you shared. You're not exactly who I thought you were. And who did you think I was? Alexander asked, remaining standing but turning to face her. Just another rich guy who thinks the world revolves around him, Emma said with unexpected candor. Someone who's never faced real hardship or had to sacrifice anything meaningful. And now? Emma studied him thoughtfully. Now, I think you're someone who built a fortress to protect a wounded heart. Not so different from me, just with a much bigger budget. Her assessment, delivered without judgment or pity, struck Alexander with unexpected force. There was truth in her words, a truth he had spent decades avoiding. What would you have done, he asked suddenly, if you had pursued your dreams instead of taking over the bookstore? Where would you be now? A wistful smile crossed Emma's face. I was studying world literature and anthropology. I wanted to travel, document disappearing storytelling traditions around the world. She shrugged. Instead, I've spent 12 years selling other people's adventures to customers in a small Virginia town. Do you regret it? Emma considered the question carefully. I don't regret honoring my parents. The store has supported me, given me purpose, connected me to my community. She paused. But sometimes I wonder who I might have become if I'd made a different choice. You could still travel, Alexander pointed out. Sell the store, go pursue that dream. Says the man who can't go a week without checking his email, Emma countered with a gentle smile. We all get comfortable in our chosen prisons, don't we? Alexander found himself smiling in return. Touché. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, they sat in companionable silence. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Alexander felt no need to fill the quiet with productivity or purpose. There was something strangely liberating about simply existing in a moment, sharing space with someone who expected nothing from him but honesty. We should head back, Emma said eventually, rising from her rock. Dinner will be served soon. As they walked down the trail together, Alexander felt a shift in the dynamic between them. No longer adversaries or reluctant roommates, but two, people bound by a shared understanding of loss and adaptation. Emma, he said as they approached the main building, the windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Thank you. For what? She asked, pausing to look at him. For seeing me, Alexander replied simply. The real me, not the persona I've created. Emma's expression softened. Maybe that's what we all really want in the end, not success or safety or control, just to be truly seen by another human being. As they rejoined the group for dinner, Alexander felt as though he had crossed an invisible threshold. The walls he had spent a lifetime building had not crumbled entirely, but a door had appeared, a door he had unlocked himself, allowing another person to glimpse what lay within. What he didn't yet realize was that once such a door is opened, it can never be fully closed again. And in the days to come, as the retreat reached its climax, that opening would become both his greatest vulnerability and his unexpected salvation. On the morning of the 6th day, Alexander woke to find Marcus's note taped to the door of the maple room. Emma was already gone, her bed neatly made, her morning meditation apparently completed elsewhere to avoid disturbing him. Emergency family situation. I must leave immediately. Retreat will continue under Sarah's guidance. Please gather in the main hall at 9 a.m. Marcus. Alexander felt a flicker of concern for his mentor, but also a sense of relief. With Marcus gone, perhaps the intensity of the retreat would diminish. The past 5 days had been emotionally exhausting, each session designed to dig deeper into the participants' psyches, challenging long-held beliefs and defense mechanisms. To his surprise, Alexander had found himself increasingly willing to engage. After his unexpected revelation in the sharing circle, something had shifted within him. The careful compartmentalization he had maintained for decades was beginning to break down, memories and emotions bleeding across the boundaries he had established. Even more surprising was his evolving relationship with Emma. Their initial antagonism had gradually transformed into a tentative friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. They had begun taking morning walks together, discussing books, politics, philosophy, conversations that continued late into the evening in the quiet of their shared room. Alexander checked his watch. 7:30 a.m. There was still time before the group meeting. He dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, attire that would have been unthinkable in his Manhattan life, but had become his uniform at the retreat. As he was about to leave the room, his gaze fell on Emma's journal, left open on her nightstand. He hesitated, ethics warring with curiosity. Then he noticed his name on the page, written in Emma's neat, flowing script. Alexander is not who I expected him to be. There is depth beneath his armor, compassion behind his walls. I wonder if he knows how much he has already changed in just a few days. I wonder if he would believe me if I told him. Alexander turned away, uncomfortable with his invasion of her privacy, yet moved by her words. Had he changed? The very fact that he was questioning it suggested that perhaps he had. He found Emma in the dining hall, sipping tea and reading as she often did before breakfast. She looked up as he approached, her smile warming her entire face in a way that sent an unexpected flutter through his chest. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Did you see Marcus's note?" Alexander nodded, taking the seat across from her. "Family emergency, apparently. Do you know what happened?" "Sarah said his daughter went into early labor. He's flying to Chicago to be with her." Emma closed her book. "It's strange to think about him having a whole life beyond these walls, isn't it? Children, grandchildren?" "I've known Marcus for years, and I know remarkably little about his personal life," Alexander admitted. "It's always been about business between us." "Typical," Emma teased. "All those hours together and you never thought to ask about his family, his passions, the things that make him who he is beyond his professional achievements." Alexander was about to defend himself when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for it before he remembered. All devices had been confiscated at the beginning of the retreat. "What is it?" Emma asked, noticing his expression. Alexander pulled out the sleek black phone that had appeared in his pocket overnight. "It seems Marcus made an exception to the no technology rule before he left." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Special treatment for the VIP. More likely a test," Alexander mused, turning the device over in his hand. The screen lit up with a string of notifications, over 200 emails, dozens of missed calls, and a flurry of text messages marked urgent. One from Michael Chen caught his eye. "Deal at risk. Goldstein backing out. Need immediate decision on Singapore expansion. Call ASAP." Alexander felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied a business crisis, the clarity of purpose, the rush of being needed, the comfort of returning to familiar territory after days of emotional exploration. "Bad news?" Emma asked, watching his face carefully. "A situation at work," Alexander replied, already scrolling through related messages. "Something I need to handle." Emma's expression shifted subtly, a hint of disappointment crossing her features. "Of course, duty calls." "I'm sorry," Alexander said, standing. "I need to make some calls before the morning session." As he walked away, phone pressed to his ear, Alexander felt himself slipping back into his CEO persona with unsettling ease. The retreat and its revelations receded as Michael Chen's voice filled his ear with urgent details about the faltering Singapore deal, a cornerstone of Reed Enterprises' Asian expansion strategy. "They need an answer by noon, New York time," Chen concluded. "Goldstein won't proceed unless you personally guarantee the additional investment. It's 40 million more than we budgeted, but if we don't move now, Chang International will swoop in." Alexander paced the empty library, the familiar calculations running through his mind. "What's Williams saying about the risk assessment?" "He says it's higher than our usual threshold, but potentially worth it for the market position. The board is split." "And your recommendation?" Alexander asked, knowing that Chen usually advocated for aggressive expansion. There was a pause on the line. "Honestly, it's your call, Alex. This could either be the move that puts us ahead for the next decade or a costly misstep." Alexander stopped by the window, gazing out at the retreat grounds where participants were beginning to gather for breakfast. He spotted Emma leaving the dining hall, her book tucked under her arm, heading toward the lake path they had walked together each morning. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "I'll call you back before the deadline." After ending the call, Alexander sank into a leather armchair, his mind torn between two worlds. The Singapore deal represented everything he had worked for: expansion, influence, the relentless pursuit of more. Yet for the first time, he found himself questioning whether acquiring another company, opening another office, adding more zeros to his net worth would actually bring him any genuine satisfaction. The library door opened and Sarah, Marcus's co-facilitator, entered with a gentle smile. "Alexander, we missed you at breakfast. The morning session is about to begin." "I've had some urgent business matters come up," he explained, holding up the phone. "I may need to step away from today's activities." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Of course, Marcus mentioned you might have responsibilities to attend to in his absence." She paused. "Today's theme is integration, bringing our insights from the retreat back into our daily lives. Perhaps your situation offers a perfect opportunity to practice that integration in real time." Alexander followed her to the main hall, his mind still preoccupied with the Singapore decision. As he took his seat in the circle, he noticed Emma, across from him, her expression carefully neutral as she acknowledged him with a slight nod. The morning session focused on identifying core values and aligning actions with those values. Exercises that would have seemed ridiculous to Alexander a week ago, but now struck him as surprisingly relevant to his current dilemma. As participants shared their reflections, he found himself only half listening, the weight of the impending decision pressing on him. When the lunch break arrived, Alexander retreated to a secluded spot overlooking the lake, spreadsheets open on his phone as he reviewed the financial projections for the Singapore expansion. The numbers were promising but not guaranteed, a calculated risk that the old Alexander would have taken without hesitation, driven by his father's voice echoing in his mind. "You're either growing or you're dying. There is no middle ground. Mind if I join you?" Alexander looked up to find Emma standing nearby, holding 2 plates of food. "I thought you might be skipping meals in your rush to save." "The corporate world," she said, offering him one of the plates. "Thank you," he said, genuinely touched by the gesture. He set his phone aside as she sat beside him on the wooden bench. "I didn't think you'd want to associate with me now that I've reverted to type." Emma shrugged. "People don't change overnight. Besides, I'm curious about what could be important enough to interrupt your journey of self-discovery." Alexander hesitated, then found himself explaining the Singapore situation, the potential expansion, the rival company, the board's divided opinion, the looming deadline. "And you have to decide by noon?" Emma asked when he finished. "Yes. It's the kind of decision I make regularly, but now you're questioning whether it's the right move," Emma finished for him. Alexander nodded, not just financially, but personally. "What would the Alexander who arrived here last week do?" Emma asked. "He'd make the deal without hesitation," Alexander answered immediately. "Growth is always the goal. Hesitation is weakness." "And what about the Alexander sitting here now? What does he want?" The question hung between them, deceptively simple yet impossibly complex. Alexander stared out at the lake, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "For the first time in my adult life, I genuinely don't know what I want." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that uncertainty is progress. Maybe it means you're finally asking the right questions." They ate in companionable silence, the beauty of the natural setting a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms where Alexander usually made such decisions. As the lunch hour drew to a close, Emma stood to return to the main building. "Whatever you decide about Singapore," she said, "make sure it's Alexander Reed making the choice, not the ghost of your father or the expectations of your board. You've built an empire following someone else's definition of success. Maybe it's time to create your own." Her words stayed with him as he dialed Michael Chen's number. The decision he was about to make would ripple through hundreds of lives: employees, shareholders, partners. For years he had made such choices based solely on growth potential and market position. Now he found himself considering a different metric: meaning. "Chen," Michael answered on the first ring. "Tell me you're giving the green light." Alexander took a deep breath. "I'm not." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're passing on Singapore?" "Alex, this is the deal we've been working toward for 3 years. "I know," Alexander replied calmly, "and it's not the right move for us. The risk is too high, the cultural integration too complex, and the human cost too great. We'd be buying market share at the expense of our company culture and our people's well-being." "Since when do you care about—" "I've always cared," Alexander interrupted. "I just haven't always prioritized it correctly. Send my regrets to Goldstein. We're going to pursue a different strategy in Asia, one that allows for more sustainable growth and better alignment with our core values." After ending the call, Alexander felt a strange combination of anxiety and liberation. He had just walked away from a deal that the old Alexander would have pursued at any cost. Yet, instead of regret, he felt a growing certainty that he had made the right choice, not just for the company but for himself. When he returned to the afternoon session, Emma caught his eye across the circle, a question in her gaze. He gave her a small nod, and the smile that spread across her face sent a warmth through him that no business victory had ever produced. As the day's activities concluded and participants dispersed for their personal reflection time, Alexander was surprised to find Thomas Wheeler, one of the quieter participants, waiting to speak with him. "Mr. Reed," Thomas began nervously, "I hope you don't mind, but I've been wanting to talk to you since I recognized your name on the first day." "Please call me Alexander," he replied, curious about the young man's interest. "I'm a high school teacher in the Bronx," Thomas explained. "I run an after-school program for at-risk students interested in technology and entrepreneurship. We've been following your career as a case study." "I'm flattered," Alexander said somewhat uncomfortably. "The thing is," Thomas continued, "these kids have amazing ideas but no resources or connections. They're brilliant, driven, but the system is stacked against them. I've been trying to secure funding or mentors, but doors keep closing." As Thomas spoke about his students, their creativity, resilience, and the obstacles they faced, Alexander felt something shift inside him. Here was purpose. Here was meaning. Here was an opportunity to use his wealth and influence for something beyond accumulation and expansion. "Send me your proposal," Alexander said impulsively. "My foundation has been focusing on traditional scholarships, but your program sounds like something we should support." Thomas's eyes widened. "Really? That would be incredible." "I can do more than funding," Alexander found himself saying. "Monthly mentorship sessions, internship opportunities, maybe even a tech incubator specifically for students from underserved communities." The ideas flowed naturally, exciting possibilities that engaged his strategic mind, while also speaking to something deeper, a desire to create value beyond a balance sheet, to leave a legacy that wasn't measured in acquisitions and market share. Later, that evening, as Alexander and Emma took their customary sunset walk around the lake, he shared his conversation with Thomas and the unexpected direction it had taken. "It sounds like you found something that excites you," Emma observed. "Your whole energy changed when you were talking about it." "It's strange," Alexander admitted. "I've always seen philanthropy as an obligation, something successful people do to improve their public image. But this feels different. It feels meaningful," Emma suggested. "Yes," Alexander agreed. "And I turned down the Singapore deal. It wasn't right. Not for the company, not for me." Emma stopped walking, turning to face him. "That's a big decision. Probably the first major business decision I've made that wasn't driven solely by growth and profit," Alexander said. "And oddly enough, I'm more confident about it than any deal I've made in years." "So what happens when you go back to New York?" Emma asked quietly. "Does this Alexander stay, or does he disappear back into the CEO persona?" The question hung between them as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the water. Alexander realized that he was standing at a crossroads. In less than 24 hours, the retreat would end. They would all return to their regular lives, carrying whatever insights they had gained back into their familiar environments. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I do know I can't go back to being exactly who I was. These past days have shown me that there's more to life than what I've been pursuing." Emma's gaze was steady, her expression open yet guarded. "And what about this?" She gestured. "Between them." "Us, you mean?" Alexander clarified, his heart rate accelerating slightly. "Is there an us?" Emma challenged. "Or is this just a retreat romance, two people connecting in an artificial environment, only to return to their separate worlds?" Alexander thought about the woman standing before him. Strong, principled, authentic, in a way he had rarely encountered. In less than a week, she had seen through his carefully constructed facade and challenged him to examine the beliefs that had shaped his life. "I'd like there to be an us," he said carefully. "But I know your life is in Virginia, and mine is in New York, and we're very different people." "Are we?" Emma asked. "Or are we just people who made different choices based on similar fears?" The insight struck Alexander with unexpected force. They had both built lives based on reactions to loss, his focused on control and achievement, hers on preservation and safety. Different manifestations of the same fundamental human need for security and meaning. What if there's a third option? Alexander suggested. Not you adapting to my world or me to yours, but both of us finding the courage to create something new. Emma's expression softened. "What are you proposing, Alexander Reed?" "I'm proposing possibility," he replied, taking her hand in his. "I'm proposing that we don't decide tonight what this is or isn't, what it can or can't be. I'm proposing that when we leave tomorrow, we leave the door open." Emma intertwined her fingers with his, the simple gesture communicating more than words could express. "Open doors can be frightening," she said softly, "but I'm beginning to think that safety isn't found in hiding from life, but in having the courage to fully live it." As they walked back to the retreat center, hand in hand under a canopy of emerging stars, Alexander felt a profound sense of rightness, not the fleeting satisfaction of closing a deal or acquiring a competitor, but something deeper and more enduring. For the first time in decades, he was making choices based not on what he had been conditioned to want, but on what truly resonated with his authentic self. 3 months later, Alexander stood in a renovated warehouse in the Bronx, surrounded by teenagers hunched over computers and electronic components. The space, once abandoned and decrepit, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art technology incubator, the first of what he hoped would be many such centers across the country. "Mr. Reed, come look at this." Jamal, a 16-year-old coding prodigy, waved him over to demonstrate a mobile app he was developing to help community members find affordable healthcare services. Alexander watched the demonstration with genuine interest, asking questions and offering suggestions. This, connecting with young minds, nurturing potential, creating opportunities, had become the most rewarding part of his week. Reed Enterprises was still thriving, but with significant changes. Alexander had restructured his executive team, promoting individuals who shared his evolving vision of corporate responsibility. The company had become a pioneer in ethical business practices, employee wellness programs, and community investment. Profits remained strong, but they were no longer the sole metric of success. His phone buzzed with a text message. "Landed safely. Can't wait to see you tonight. Emma." A smile spread across his face as he typed his reply, counting the hours. "Dinner reservations at 8. Big question tonight." In the months since the retreat, Alexander and Emma had navigated the complexities of a long-distance relationship. Weekends in Virginia or New York, daily video calls, and a deepening connection that transcended their different backgrounds. She had maintained her bookstore, but had also begun writing a book about global storytelling traditions, the dream she had deferred for so long. The big question had been carefully planned. Tonight, over dinner at the rooftop restaurant where they had shared their first real date, Alexander would ask Emma to marry him, not in the grand, showy fashion his former self might have orchestrated, but intimately and authentically, a genuine expression of his desire to build a life with her. The ring in his pocket wasn't the largest or most expensive he could afford. Emma had made it clear she valued meaning over extravagance. Instead, it featured a blue stone that matched the one she had held during the sharing circle at the retreat, a symbol of the moment she had first allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with him. As Alexander left the incubator center, nodding goodbye to Thomas, who was mentoring another group of students, he reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 3 months. The transformation that had begun at the retreat hadn't ended when he returned to New York. Instead, it had deepened and expanded, challenging him daily to align his actions with his evolving values. There had been setbacks, of course. Old habits resurfaced under stress. Board members questioned his new direction. Friends from his former life drifted away as his priorities shifted. But through it all, Alexander had maintained his commitment to authentic living, supported by Emma's unwavering belief in his capacity for change. Later that evening, as Emma said yes with tears in her eyes and the New York skyline glittering around them, Alexander realized that his father had been wrong all those years ago. The measure of a man wasn't his wealth or power or control, it was his courage to be vulnerable, his willingness to grow, and his capacity to love and be loved in return. The empire he had built still stood, but its purpose had been fundamentally reimagined. And the life he was now creating with Emma promised something his previous achievements never could. Not just success, but genuine fulfillment. Not just the respect of others, but love. Not just the accumulation of more, but the discovery of enough. As they sipped champagne and planned their future together, a life that would blend their separate worlds into something new and beautiful, Alexander silently thanked Marcus for the gift he had given him, not just a week away from work, but the opportunity to rediscover his humanity and reconnect with his authentic self. In the end, Alexander Reed had achieved something far more valuable than financial success. He had found his way home, to himself, to love, and to a life of purpose and meaning that no balance sheet could ever quantify. Fim da Historia, dear. Listeners, we hope that Alexander and Emma's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. The path from isolation to connection, from fear to courage, from a life of hollow success to one of genuine meaning, these transformations remind us that it's never too late to rewrite our stories. If you've enjoyed this tale of redemption and authentic living, please subscribe to our channel and like this video to help others discover it too. Every day, we bring you stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human experience, each one carefully crafted to entertain, inspire, and perhaps even change the way you see the world. What transformation might be waiting for you just beyond the comfort of familiar patterns? What authentic connections might you discover if you had the courage to be truly seen? Join us in the comments below to share your thoughts on Alexander and Emma's journey, or perhaps to share a moment when you chose authenticity over safety in your own life. Until our next story, remember that the most valuable things in life can